there has been an escalating issue about what the nature of free speech is, what the nature of First Amendment rights are, and how that plays out particularly on American college campuses and to some degree in American education, classrooms, pre-collegiate as well. So clearly this has been an issue you've been looking at, thinking about for a long time. And this is one of those cases where, when the Deep Horizon drilling disaster happened, suddenly everybody who had been a longtime expert on drilling and deep sea drilling was like all over TV, but they had been doing the same thing and thinking about it forever. And to some degree, this is the moment where everybody is turning to Greg and going, okay, what's going on here, and help us figure it out. I guess this is a total softball, but it's also just an open question of what have you learned from the past few months, if anything, that you hadn't been already focused on before the past few months?
Oh man, I will say that I feel like the past couple months has been a little bit of catching up to what we've been doing on campus for a long time, and by we I mean FIRE. My book Counseling of the American Mind came out like pretty shortly after the Hamas attacks. Writing that book, I just got very depressed about, even though I've been doing this for 22 years, about how bad the situation had gotten for freedom of inquiry, free speech on campus. And by the way, we talk about threats both from the left and the right, and the fact that both of them are happening. People who are super partisan are kind of like, oh, but the threats are coming from both sides. I'm like, no, that makes it worse. That doesn't make it better. That means there's more threats. But the only good thing I can say that probably came out of post October 7th on campus is that we have a lot fewer people thinking there's not a problem on campus. There was an article that I read in Politico that was talking about when some of the pro-Palestinian students were having their jobs threatened, being kind of like, there's something new afoot that we haven't seen in a long time. People are getting in trouble for their opinions on campus. And I'm like, really, this is new. So we have seen a big uptick of pro-Palestinian students getting in trouble on campus. But one of the things I pointed out in that Atlantic article is we're still not seeing the kind of numbers of professors getting punished or students getting punished that we saw in, say, 2020 and 2021.
So, okay, so in the short term, immediate past, we've gotten slightly better. How much worse has the situation gotten since fire began in the late 90s? And I think you joined in 2001, if that's right.
Yeah, I wanted to do free speech for my career. Like I went to law school to do First Amendment. I specialized in it. I took every class that my law school offered. I worked at the ACLU of Northern California. I did 6 credits on censorship during the Tudor dynasty. And even back in 2001, I was surprised at how easy it was to get in trouble on a college campus once I had the national view of it. And I wrote a book called Unlearning Liberty back in 2012 that focused a lot on bad cases I'd seen maybe in 2007, 2008. And, I'd probably say there were like a dozen bad cases that I was talking about, but, the severity of them I thought was concerning. I haven't seen anything remotely like what I've seen on campuses since I'd say about 2017, 2018, in terms of professors getting punished, students getting in trouble. And to be clear, like when I said that like 2020 and 2021 are somewhat worse, they're only somewhat worse. Like 2023 is not going to go down as a good year for free speech on campus by any stretch of the imagination. It's so one of the things I've been saying is like, no, actually to extent things are normal on campus, at least since 2018. In 2023, just normal is bad at the moment, and we have a long way to go if we want to actually start respecting free speech on campus again.
So one thing that struck me is, look, one of the premises of the Progress Network, which your colleague Jonathan Haidt is part of, is that we by human nature pay a lot more attention to the dramatic and the intense and the conflict, and we don't pay a lot of attention to things when they're okay, right?
Yeah.
So there's no history of peace, there's no really interesting news about sunny weather.
Yeah.
And the airspace of like free speech being threatened on campus is largely occupied by certainly what went on with the Harvard, MIT, and Penn presidents.
The presidents of 3 of the top universities in the world, Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania, accused of failing to condemn anti-Semitism on their campuses.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, It depends on the context.
The next day, Claudine Gay, president of Harvard, issuing a statement saying that calls for violence or genocide against the Jewish community or any religious or ethnic group are vile. They have no place at Harvard. Following the hearing, the House Committee on Education and the Workforce has now announced a formal investigation into the three universities.
But clearly there are many, many, many campuses in the United States that are either navigating these problems, people are protesting, but it's not leading to outrage, or there isn't even that much protest one way or another. I guess my question is, are we paying too much attention, particularly in the past months, because it's a juicy story, right? Elite universities tearing each other apart, donors enraged, front page stories of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and everybody, right? It's like a whole big deal. But we don't pay attention to, I'm friendly with the chancellor of the Vanderbilt University. I mean, for all I know, from what I can tell, there hasn't been anything of particular note there. Or the
That's an
University of
unusually
Chicago.
good school for free speech, by the way. Like in terms of like the chancellor actually understanding freedom of speech, like he gets it.
So, but I guess the question is: are we paying too much attention to the drama, and not enough attention to, I guess, those places where there isn't any?
I'll take it, because I'm glad that people are paying some attention to this, because it's been getting worse kind of below the radar for a long time. I felt like a lot of my early career was being like, I know we all thought that there was this stuff going on regarding free speech on campus in, say, like the late 80s, early 90s, but students are still getting in trouble for a lot of, forgive the expression, BS that is clearly protected, that sometimes isn't even political. It's just, someone not liking, someone from like a PR flack from the university not liking what an RA was saying. So things have gotten sufficiently bad that I think that a serious reevaluation of kind of the state of higher ed is in order, even if the only issue in higher ed today was that it's been bureaucratizing too much. It's becoming too expensive to educate a single student. And I don't mean like the cost that students pay out of pocket alone. I mean, universities are now claiming that it costs about $170,000 a year to educate a single student for a single year. And to me, like, that's not sustainable. So even outside of the politics, even outside of the free speech thing, I think the way we do higher ed in the US needs some reevaluation, even just from a class, like an economic class point of view. Now, is it true that some schools are doing way, way better than others? Absolutely. We do a campus free speech ranking every year. We've been able to improve it. And this year, we did the largest survey of student opinion on free speech ever conducted. And we have the 4 largest databases on professor cancellation, student cancellations, deplatforming, and evaluating all of their codes by First Amendment standards. And we wouldn't do that if we didn't think some schools are better than others. Although the ones that actually ranked really well in many cases are schools that people don't think of as much. So like Michigan Technological University was the one that landed number 1, according to our data, which was a lovely surprise to us. University of Virginia, as far as a school that's actually pretty well known and prestigious, it was in the top 10. University of Chicago, unsurprisingly, was 13th. But the Ivy League did terribly. And I remember being up in Boston giving a presentation on my new book and having this lovely MIT student being kind of like, it can't really be that the elite schools are worse than, say, the big state schools. I'm really sorry to say this, but I've been doing this 22 years, and there is no question that the elite schools have a bigger free speech problem than a lot of these big state schools. And I honestly think I see a lot of this from a class perspective. One of the reasons why some of the big state schools don't have, quite as many issues is because they are more class diverse and they're big. Like when you have that kind of actual literal, even numeric diversity, but also class diversity, it makes it easier to get away from the people who want to cancel you. I think it forces a little bit greater tolerance. The problems I'm seeing in the Ivy League are quite pronounced. I do want to do one shout out for one Ivy League school, though, that I think is doing better than most of the rest, and that's Dartmouth under its new president, Sayan Balak. She actually wrote a bestseller called Choke. What they've been doing is they've been doing the hard work of having dialogues specifically about issues, including the Palestine-Israel conflict, since before the crisis happened. And that's one of the reasons why I think you haven't been seeing the sort of shocking scenes that you've seen at, say, Harvard, for example.